Hello, and welcome back to Full Time. I'm Tamerra Griffin, and honestly, I'm struggling to remember what day it is because we are in that extremely awkward period between Christmas and New Year's where you're just kind of vibing. We're going to do a little bit more than vibing on the show today because we need to catch you guys up a little bit on what you may have missed if you got lost in the rapture of the holiday season, which if you did, I love for you. And conveniently, we have this episode where we discuss the high-impact player rule that the NWSL introduced last week that will allow NWSL teams to spend up to $1 million above the current salary cap for certain players that meet this high-impact player criteria. We're going to get all deep into every point of this criteria, what it means, what it implies about the direction that the NWSL sees the league going. And also, we're going to get into the response that came within hours of the announcement of this rule from the NWSL Players Association, which, if you've been following this saga, you won't be surprised to know that the Players Association vehemently opposes this rule. They believe that it cannot be reached, a decision like this, without a collective bargaining agreement, and are not afraid to enter arbitration over this. So we are still sort of at like the preface of this story. And because it's deep and complex and layered and warrants discussion, I think at every point of this story, we're going to be keeping pace with it. As you know, Meg is blessedly on parental leave. Meg, I hope you're not listening to this, but if you are, hi. We miss you. And also, enjoy the rest. But this is way too much for me to digest and process aloud on my own. So in order to do that, king of the smooth and silky transition, Theo Lloyd-Hughes. Theo, how's it going?
Hello, Tamerra. Wow. I'm blushing. For those viewers on YouTube, hello. I cannot believe I've been introduced as the king of the silky transition.
You set such a high bar.
I know. It's great to see you.
It deserves a title.
Well, Merry Twixtmas is what I call this. Betwixtmas. This is the time between Christmas and New Year. In the UK, we often refer to this as the Twixmas. It's a funny time.
Very catchy.
It's a funny time. Great to be here. Meg, if you're listening, turn it off. Turn off the pod.
Yeah,
listener,
you've heard enough.
Listener, viewers on YouTube, please keep listening. Meg, you can switch it off.
Theo, before we get into high-impact player-related things, there is a bit of news that I think we need to discuss because I, for one, was quite surprised to hear this.
Yeah.
San Diego Wave and goalkeeper and Canada international Kailen Sheridan have mutually agreed to terminate her contract. This kind of bowled me over a little bit. I mean, the San Diego Wave have said goodbye to a lot of players in even this like very early stage of the postseason, but Kailen Sheridan has been with this club since its inception in 2022. She was voted goalkeeper of the year that same season, which saw them make an entrance into the playoffs as an expansion team. It's hard to sort of extricate her from the Wave, especially since we've already said goodbye to players like Alex Morgan, who's retired, Naomi Girma, who's with Chelsea, Jayden Shaw, who's made her moves away from the club. What was your initial reaction to this move? News, really.
Yeah, I think it was pretty shocking, wasn't it? Not necessarily because this time of year, it should be said, we are really accustomed to seeing major moves, and I think we're going to see a lot more in January, February, leading up to preseason, the start of the new NWSL season in March. So in some ways, yes, or, listener, journalists out there, media, players, be on guard because there could be a move around every corner, and Kailen Sheridan leaving the Wave was certainly something that could happen. I think the way it happened is the most surprising thing, which is that they mutually agreed to terminate the contract. They've released Kailen Sheridan. They didn't necessarily shop around and find a trading partner or a transfer fee. This was very much sort of a conversation, as far as we know from the press release by General Manager Camille Ashton. This was, in her words, the best for both parties. So obviously there were conversations going on during the off-season at which Sheridan's place at the Wave was no longer required, or maybe she wanted a new contract. She had 1 year left on her deal. This is all stuff we don't know, but essentially the Wave and Sheridan came to an agreement that she was better off elsewhere, which, like you said, for a keeper that many believe to be one of the best in the league, maybe top 5, it is a strange decision. San Diego currently have no goalkeepers on their roster, so we can only assume there is some more goalkeepers and probably a very high-profile, high-caliber goalkeeper on the way in.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before we started recording, Kansas City Current were at one point in a similar position, turned around and got Lorena. So San Diego Wave fans, don't start letting veins pop out of your forehead in stress yet. I do think that, I personally have been intrigued by San Diego Wave's recruitment ever since Cami Ashton took over as general manager. And I want to still feel separate from my feelings about Kaylin leaving and in the manner that she did. I think given things that have happened within this club in the past, with under different ownership, with a different general manager and coaches, I can understand the impulse to really start freaking out when you hear about these abrupt announcements, because that's how we learned that Casey Stoney was getting fired, But I think that for me, this is a both-and situation. This was this was a very bad and sad sort of way to hear about the departure of a player who's been so core to the club. And also, it's hard to imagine that given the season San Diego Wave had, that they don't have something really solid lined up.
I think we'll have to wait and see, right? We obviously haven't spoken to Kaylin Sheridan. She'll have her own side of the story.
Right.
I think there was
we don't know where she's headed.
Yeah, exactly. What her landing spot is, what kind of new contract she gets, what kind of team she lands on. Like, all of these affect this kind of transaction, because obviously, in many ways, maybe the Wave could have said, we're going to bench you, you're not our starter, but we're not going to release you. We're going to hold you to that 2026 contract, and we're going to need someone to come and pay a transfer fee. So in some ways, Sheridan maybe got some of her 2026 contract up front, and she now is a free agent to go and find a new club. So in some ways, it's like, this is actually better than previous versions of NWSL contracts where players had less agency. She actually has her agency, which I think, the NWSLPA will tell you is a great thing. I think the abruptness around the Christmas period, that stinks. That's never going to feel good. And I think we saw a comment on social media from Kaylin Sheridan's wife about the difficulties of managing a major move while all that's going on. But in some ways, I think this... With a new baby, who, by the way, was the star of World Sevens.
My God, I'm never going to get that image out of my head.
Yeah, we spoke on the podcast not too long ago about the San Diego Wave and baby Skylar being kind of the star of World Sevens. So it's funny, only weeks away from the Wave taking home over $2 million and Sheridan being part of that, to then this happening. And maybe even perhaps that is why this decision is coming now and not, say, at the end of the playoffs.
I'm sure you guys all have thoughts about Kaylin Sheridan leaving the Wave, where the Wave are at generally, and I'm sure you have thoughts about this high-impact player role, which we're going to talk about in a second. But if you don't have anywhere else to put those thoughts, the group chat is still in holiday mode. Consider us a friendly ear or set of eyes. Slide into our DMs at TA Fulltime on Instagram and TikTok. Write us an email. Hopefully you don't have to worry about too much work right now and have the time. fulltime@theathletic.com. We love to hear from you. And I always say this, but as a journalist, it really helps to hear from you guys and where your minds are at, what your concerns are, because that informs a lot of my reporting. A lot of the time, journalism is a service, and I want to be of service as best as I can. And it's just nice to hear from folks. So feel free to hit us up. We're always checking our inboxes. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're diving deep into this new rule and all of its implications for the NWSL, and of course, what it might mean for probably the number one free agent still on everyone's lips, Trinity Rodman, right after this break.
Let's do it. You, me, the high-impact player rule. Now, before we go any further, Tamerra, obviously, for some people who are really enjoying their Christmas periods, we can rewind a little bit to the 23rd of December. It's almost Christmas Eve. Who would have thought the NWSL was going to drop major news on the 23rd of December? But there we were. In our inboxes lands the high-impact player rule. So, Tamerra, in case people missed it, let's just start off by breaking down all the info here. What is the new high-impact player rule?
The rule itself is a new roster mechanism that, like I mentioned at the top of the show, allows NWSL teams, if they choose, to spend up to $1 million on top of the current salary cap in order to sign a player who meets the high impact player criteria. I believe there are 8 bullet points. A player need only satisfy one of those 8 in order.
Crucial. 1 of 8.
Only one of 8.
Only
yes.
1 of 8. Yeah.
It would actually be funny to think if there is a player who satisfies all 8. I don't think
That's
so.
interesting.
We'll get into the criteria in a second. But if you know of a player who is like a unicorn, let us know. But yes, it's crucial. You only need to satisfy one of the 8 points of criteria in order to qualify as a high impact player. That additional money can be spent on a single star player, or it can be distributed across multiple players as long as they qualify as a high impact player.
You want to get Trinity Rodman? Maybe she needs $1 million of off-cap spending, but maybe you want to get give me 2 high-impact names, Tamerra. Should we just pull 2 out of thin air? Let's say Delphine Cascarina.
Okay.
There's one. There's one. And let's say
Melchi Dumornay?
Melchi Dumornay.
Could you imagine, first of all?
So let's say those 2, maybe they accept $500,000 each from this $1 million up to $1 million cash. So in this example that we're kind of helping you understand here, listener, you have $1 million off cap money to spend, could go to 1 player, could go to 2 players, could go to 3 players, but that collective off cap spend can't exceed $1 million.
Exactly. And that's a really important point, because I think there's sort of like an implication of singularity when we talk about high impact player that can make it really easy to believe that that each team can only select one high impact player on whom to spend this up to $1 million. But it's really as many as you want. Although I imagine you can't be getting too excited about it, because then the amount that you can offer each player goes down. And if they are as high impact as based on this criteria, we should assume them to be, you can only go so low when it comes to salary. For those of you who've been following the NWSL since, let's say, 2020, this might sound a little bit similar to how allocation money worked. Basically a way of spending more on stars outside of the salary cap. And that is the major sticking point, I would say, between the league and the PA right now, which, like I said earlier, we're also going to get into.
There is, in some ways, a returning to an old form of the NWSL here. And this is something, listener, if you pause this show, you can go and listen to the show we did with Paul Tenorio and Meg Linehan.
Highly recommend.
Because that kind of explored all the avenues the NWSL could go down, looking at MLS, looking at NBA. And the NWSL has sort of zagged a little bit and gone almost back into its own history, which was essentially a way of paying players like Alex Morgan or US Women's National Team players and making them off-cap players that you could essentially overspend on. It's a little bit like the DP rule, but to Tamerra's point about the lack of it's not one high impact player. Really, it's just creating money that isn't available to the majority of your squad, rather than necessarily having players who are designated to earn more. It's about having a slosh of cash. In this case, $1 million. I think allocation money used to be more in the kind of 300-400.
That's what I remember too.
I think obviously this is a long time ago, so there was less money in the NWSL. But really, we're just seeing almost a revamped version of what US Women National Team players used to earn in the early form of the NWSL. So it is quite weird. I think the other thing to just clear up as well is that these players do still get charged on the existing salary cap. It's just that charge is a minimum of 12%. So 12% of the 2026 salary cap will be $420,000. So again, in an imaginary example, Trinity Rodman could be earning $1 million in 2026, but only $420,000 of that million would come out of the salary cap charge. The rest would be taken out of the high impact player $1 million.
A lot to keep track of.
Yes.
But that was a clear explanation, Theo. I appreciate that. It is definitely a lot of math, but we need things, because if this rule goes through, the NWSLPA has been very clear that they plan to take it into arbitration, which gets into the next steps, which we will also be discussing. The timeline on this could actually be quite lengthy, which would have a whole other kind of domino effect on players' decisions to maybe come into the league or re-sign with the league, based on this rule that may or may not end up actually being codified. But before we get too far down that road, let's just break down, Theo, the criteria that I mentioned that will allow a player to qualify as high impact.
If a player is on the Sports Pro Media top 150 most marketable athletes within 1 year of the upcoming league season, they can be a high impact player. Tamerra, I'll tell you what, I was not familiar with this list until the high impact player rule came out.
I'm right there with you. Was not familiar with it. One of the things that I did when I started researching each of these criterium was
love that.
I actually went through my email inbox, not only my athletic email, but my personal email from my freelancing days to see if I ever received like a list from Sports Pro Media. You know how people will always want you to publicize these lists. And
did you?
No. My concern with lists that purport to rank and yes, honor players based on marketability, especially if I'm yet to see a list like this, let's say, that actually takes into consideration sort of like a holistic approach to what it means to be marketable. I think that in the U.S. especially, and this is something that I ran out of words. I was over my word limit with the piece that I wrote, so I didn't get to include this, so I'll say it here. Beauty of working multiple jobs.
Yeah.
Is that I think that marketability 9 times out of 10, maybe even 9.5 times out of 10, when we talk about marketability in an American context, we're talking about heterosexuality, we're talking about cisgender, we're talking about being white, we're talking about being conventionally attractive, which really is just a proximity to European beauty standards. All of those things sometimes take precedence over performance, or at least they are the filter through which we assess performance, as in players who meet those criteria and happen to be good are therefore most marketable. And I think historically that has meant not only in sports, but in all industries, missing out on serious, real, raw, natural talent. Now, I do think that's beginning to change. And I'm not only singling out Sports Pro Media about this. I think this is an issue, like I said, across.
Yeah.
They just happen to be at the top of the list. So they're getting a little bit more smoke than everyone else. But
Tamerra, can I yes and you right now?
Please.
Because everything you just said applies to the next thing on the criteria list, which is that a player has to be selected in the top 30 in Ballon d'Or voting in the 2 years prior to the current NWSL season. Everything you said about marketability could be applied to people that judge performance in a Eurocentric award like the Ballon d'Or.
Yeah.
So one thing is trying to unpack the intersectionality of marketing dollars, but arguably the judgment of performance in the game of soccer and football that we love so much often falls by the same biases, or at the very least, imperfections in coverage and investment.
Exactly. And that's before, when we talk about the Ballon d'Or, we talk about the disparity in the voting structure of that award between the women's game and the men's game. The men get 100 voters, the women only get 50. And of those 50, because I've written about this too, after the Ballon d'Or ceremony, of the 50...
athletic.com/Tamerra Griffin.
Thank you. Just, catch up if you haven't already, if you haven't been keeping step. But of the 50 voters in Ballon d'Or Feminine, 29 of them are based in Europe. These ranking systems are inherently imbalanced. You're just going to be setting yourself up to further filter players who can qualify as high impact. Yes, we've only talked about 2 of the 8 so far, but they all are affected by this unconscious, or maybe even conscious, because I'm cynical, bias. And that's where a lot of my concern lies. And I think that concern, based on communication with NWSL Players Association Executive Director Megan Burke, I think that concern is sort of reflected in the NWSL players' concerns, which we'll get to in a second. But let's go to the third bullet point. Is it my turn again? Or did you have more to say about Ballon d'Or?
No, you go.
Okay, so we've got Sports Media top 150 most marketable athletes, Ballon d'Or. The third, similar to Ballon d'Or, a player needs to be selected in the top 40 of the Guardian's top 100 football players of the year, 2 years prior to the start of the season.
Can I just say, why top 40? Like, this is such a random
It did feel random.
cutoff. Like, why
Especially
40?
when you look at the list. It's not organized in like top 40
right.
and then
why not 50?
41
Why not
to
41?
100.
Why not just the whole top 100? Like, I'm just kind of like, that seems so arbitrary.
Yeah.
And we'll get into more of the arbitration later. Next one is a player is selected in the, again, top 40 of ESPN's top 50 football players in the world in the last 2 years prior. That list actually was published on Christmas Eve. So we really we were really rocked. It was a rocking 23rd and 24th of December last week because we had the list, the HIP rule announcement on the 23rd. The NWSLPA's opposition comes very shortly after. And then ESPN, and honestly, fair play, dropped their top
they were
50
like, we're not mixed up in this. You come out with your rule and then we'll come out with our list.
And then we'll go out of that list.
Right.
And it should be said, ESPN, and we'll get to this in the next part of the pod, but like ESPN is also a broadcast partner of the NWSL. So you're sort of handing control of player contracts and earnings and all this stuff to a broadcaster. And obviously great journalists, you know, I'm not throwing shade on what those individual people are doing, but they themselves do have an invested interest within the league. And so, yeah, the next thing on the list is the top 40 players in the ESPN's top 50 players could have access to this high impact player fund. T, next one.
Yeah, so I feel like the first four that we just mentioned sort of fall under the same umbrella, which is rankings and lists appearances. These other ones are slightly different. I mean, maybe toward the end it gets a little bit back into rankings and lists, but I'll say these next two are very different, and they are specifically focused on achievements in the U.S. women's national team. It is specific to the U.S. in terms of national teams, which I think is also a point worth unpacking. But of the players within the U.S. women's national team who have played the top 11 most minutes, I hope this makes sense. Just know that the way I'm trying to explain it is the way my brain is trying to process it,
the 11 players with the most amount of minutes.
Most minutes. Thank you. Then you're considered high impact. And this needs to have been achieved before two calendar years before the start of the NWSL season. So if a player wants to sign for 2026, we're looking at 2024, or
2025.
Or 2025, which, well, let's get into the next point and then we'll talk about this set of criteria.
So those 11 players are outfielders. There is a separate criteria for goalkeepers, which is only the goalkeeper with the most amount of minutes in either 2024 or 2025, in this case for 2026, but a rolling 2-year window for high impact goalkeeper. This kind of like putting a button on the US Women's National Team section of this feels very retro NWSL, prioritizing national team players being able to access cash. The rest of the league can't. And I also think, again, it creates an unfair responsibility on someone like Emma Hayes, who, whether she likes it or not, is affecting the salaries of the players she's choosing. Because, Tamerra, what has been the vibe of 2025 in the US Women's National Team? What has been the theme of this year?
Rotation, experimentation.
So that is the antithesis of the idea of a high impact player being the player with the most minutes, being the most key player for a national team, when the emphasis has been rotation, has been, you know, sharing the minutes. I think Michelle Cooper was someone who, when people were crunching the numbers, was 20 minutes or something away from being in the top 11 minutes for the US Women's National Team. So thus, she is 20 minutes away from being able to access cash she couldn't otherwise access, which just sort of proves how arbitrary and sort of unfair these particular criteria are.
100%. I mean, I'm thinking about the vibe in the U.S. Women's National Team camp in 2024, which began with interim head coach Twyla Kilgore, who was maintaining the ship and slowly sort of like slow dripping Emma Hayes' strategies until she could take over 2 months before an Olympics. I mean, I'm even thinking about what this 2-year window means when you are not working toward a global tournament versus when you are, and how different those rosters are going to look and why. I mean, Emma Hayes this year has said so many times I've lost count that she is not interested in results. She's interested in development. That has been, really, that's what this 2025 has been about, development, and thus rotation and experimentation. But like you said, it can be completely arbitrary when something with a completely different sort of remit and mandate and calendar and list of priorities is being used in this context because, again, players who might otherwise be considered deserving could be missing out on this opportunity. So those two U.S. women's national team requirements are a bit awkward, to put it gently. But I also think that they kind of make their own category, since they don't necessarily have to do with subjective lists, but they are specific to one national team.
On, so the next two criteria are NWSL MVP finalists within the last two seasons and NWSL End of Year Awards, Best 11s, etc. Can I talk about a player, again, who misses out on this criteria,
Please.
Which I think is interesting? Tamerra. Do you know who the highest scoring American in the NWSL was in 2025?
Was it Riley Tiernan?
No, incorrect.
Wait, can I have one more guess?
Yeah, have another guess.
Emma Sears?
Emma Sears.
Mm.
And she would not qualify as a high impact player. And so you have this, because she's not in the top 11 she's not in the top 11 players for minutes for the US Women's National Team. So again, you have the highest scoring American in the NWSL who's doing everything in the league at her club to access the biggest contract possible. But because she's not recognized by ESPN, Sports Market Watch, The Guardian, she didn't get in the NWSL Teams of the Year, which maybe would be where you'd think she would have got those votes. But anyway, the highest scoring American with 10 goals, Emma Sears, does not qualify. So it's like, I think this is the perfect point to bring in, your article speaking to Meg Burke. Like, tell me what the NWSLPA said when they read all this criteria and kind of how they went about things. Because I think they were probably spinning just as much as you and me.
Yeah, I mean, the PA spoke to nearly every player in the NWSL, somewhere in the ballpark of 400 people, which is quite a feat during the off season when people are who knows where trying to enjoy their time off. So credit to them for even gathering the opinions. But the broad sort of stroke summary of their concerns when I asked Executive Director of the Megan Burke was, as we've sort of been mentioning throughout this conversation, the types of players that it excludes. And I think when you look at the title of this rule, high impact player, it's such a loaded sort of title and designation for a player that, based on between the sort of weight of that title and the criteria that we've read, players are concerned about players who are of African descent, Japanese players, Brazilian players, who, with the latter two, those two specific countries, we have seen completely change the fabric of this league over the years. I mean, I feel like Brazilian players right now, in the last sort of handful of years, have been following Marta's footsteps into this league and truly taking it by storm. And when we look ahead to 2027, I'm expecting that to sort of continue, just the profile of Brazilian women's football to increase, not just in the NWSL, but all over the world. But when you look at this criteria and everything that we've said, from the Sports Pro Media list to Ballon d'Or, I do want to give The Guardian some credit, because I think that they've probably been the most intentional about all of these sort of lists and awards set group to cast as wide and diverse a net as possible, and are pretty transparent about who they choose and how the voting breaks down. So credit to The Guardian for that. I'm glad that they're included on this list. But none of these lists are a perfect science, and I appreciate that a player needs to only qualify for one of them. But the fact, and this is very much the intention of the NWSL, the fact that every player does not have an equal opportunity to qualify for any of the 8 points of criteria, like I said, already creates an uneven playing field that does reflect the types of players that the league wants to invest in this high impact way, or wants to allow NWSL teams, let's say, to invest in a high impact way. And that's another issue that the players have. They think that this needs to be a collectively bargained agreement in order to change the rule. And I think what I am still honestly having trouble wrapping my head around in terms of equity is why the NWSL is so adamantly against the PA's suggestion that if we're talking about $1 million, if we can both agree that $1 million needs to be injected into these leagues are given to these teams, why not just increase the salary cap by $1 million and give teams that much more agency in how they spend the money? And that seems to be a point at which neither side is able to find common ground. And that's why the NWSLPA has said that they have no problem and will not hesitate to enter arbitration over this, because they believe firmly that this needs to be collectively bargained. So I think for anyone who's been following or has, knowledge of the way unions work generally, not even just in the sports industry, these concerns are very much aligned with the way that unions operate. They have all players in mind, not just high impact ones, not just the ones who are considered most marketable. And I do think that the language of this rule and the criteria that we've just broken down offers a pretty clear picture of the kinds of players that the league wants to grant teams the ability to invest in. And that sort of intervention, I think, is another concern that the Players Association has. They want agency to be with the teams, which is not unreasonable.
Yeah, I want to just throw in some kind of quotes here, what we heard from both sides of the table, because I think what we're getting at here is yet another sort of battle between the league and the PA, which I want to get into a little bit more in a sec. But when the NWSL announced this new rule, they said they had consulted with the PA, and per the rules of the CBA, per the NWSL, that was enough to push in the new rules.
So consultation time, they call it.
Consultation, exactly. So they said we consulted the PA per the CBA. That's all we needed to do. We're in our right to change the rules. We consulted them. It's not like they didn't have a preview of what was going to happen. Yeah, we move on. That's what the NWSL say. New rule comes into effect on the 1st of July, 2026. That's what the NWSL says. The PA bites back immediately and says, under federal law, this is a quote, under federal law, changes to compensation under the salary cap are mandatory, subject to bargaining, not a matter of unilateral discretion. Fair pay is realized through fair collective and bargain compensation systems, not arbitrary classifications. A league that truly believes in the value of its players would not be afraid to bargain over it. So again, this is where this arbitration and potential lawsuits and this new rule and opposition rolling on for what could be months, right, Tamerra? It is not only necessarily a disagreement about the rule itself, concerns over cash not being available to all players, concerns over not increasing the cap. It is a legal concern and opposition to the way the NWSL acted in this case. I think that's just something to also kind of ram home here. And when you spoke to Megan Burke, Tamerra, I really hope we can get her on the show soon too. I just want to read a quote that she told you in your article, that players feel that this is a rush decision to solve a short-term problem that will have long-term consequences. Unilaterally, it establishes criteria that relies on third-party publications to drive player compensation. It circumvents the collective bargaining process. I think those are the key lines to just kind of highlight here that Megan Burke told you in your reporting, that is their position. Not only did the NWSL overstep what they believe to be the established rules in this collective bargaining agreement, they also believe this criteria established by the owners and Commissioner Jess Berman is going to disenfranchise players and create an unfair compensation model. So I think that is kind of the state of everything, right? That's kind of where we are as of almost the end of 2025.
It is. And I think the timing of this is also something that's worth acknowledging, because what's also happening is that because we're at the end of the year, because it's the off season, because people are daring to take some time away from their inboxes, we're getting these very sort of stagnated updates when people just happen to be sort of checked in. And listen, I am so aggressively pro vacation. It's almost a problem. So I believe in this. Like, people should be taking a break right now. But when there is such a weighty decision, multiple decisions that need to be made, it's just going to elongate the process. It's going to, I think, when we think about the fact that the international transfer window is about to open.
1st of January.
1st of January, where, I mean, the countdown has begun. The fact that this rule that we should basically assume is going to enter arbitration is sort of just hanging in the wings. Real, but not totally official yet. And the fact that there are so many players whose decisions to come to the NWSL, to re-sign with an NWSL team, might be hinging on this. That's why I said in the beginning of the show that it still, to me, Theo, feels like we're still in the preface of this story.
Yeah, we should also say that this week, so the 29th and 30th of December, Commissioner Jess Berman has actually flown to the World Soccer Summit in Dubai, hosted and funded by the Crown Prince of Dubai. So I don't think, based on her speaking at panels in the Middle East, I don't think we're going to get a response this week. You know, I don't think we're going to get anything in the near future. And we should also add that at the beginning of December, the Washington Spirit offered a contract under the old rules that the NWSL rejected, and the NWSLPA filed a grievance. So we have that grievance.
And that's not going anywhere, no matter what Trinity Rodman decides to do.
We believe that has been extended. We were expecting something the week before last. It didn't come. Mm-hmm. So that original contract, in theory, needs a resolution. That is before the high impact player rule came in. And now we have this second potential arbitration, which is over the high impact player rule itself. So the PA is fighting two separate battles. One for the free agency of Trinity Rodman and that contract, which obviously affects all players. If the NWSL can reject one contract, who else would it step in front of? And now this rule, which again, they have several issues with the way the NWSL did it, as well as this criteria. So like you said, T, it feels like we're in for, legal spring, #legal hot legal spring.
Like hot legal spring, hot legal winter.
Hot legal winter. Is this what we, as football journalists, it's like, this is kind of maybe where we're at. And I guess my question for you, T, as we start to kind of unpack these final parts of this, is like, why do you think the owners and Commissioner Berman chose such an obtuse and confusing resolution rather than just abiding by the PA's request to add $1 million? Because if we basically now assume that out of an owner's pocket is coming $4.5 million, or up to $4.5 million, the 3.5 salary plus the 1 million high impact, what does it matter if that's? I mean, I think I have a reason why, but I kind of want to ask you the question naively, like, why does it matter that there's this criteria? So why do you think the owners and Berman went this route?
My critical read is that this is the kind of decision that somebody makes in order to maintain a certain degree of control that will keep them comfortable. And I'm saying this, removing the layers of soccer, women's sports, like all of these sort of like identifiers that make this conversation feel very specific. Because to me, anytime someone is uncomfortable, their desire to control a situation, like their grip on control, instinctively tightens, I think, for most people. To not have what to me would be an abundance mindset shows that for them to get, they have a very narrow perspective on what it means to get a return on investment, put it that way. And I can only just imagine if a rule like this had existed 2 years ago, what that might have meant for a player like Tamerra Griffin.
Right.
Who, I mean, we can go back and run the numbers against this criteria, but I don't know that she would have qualified necessarily as a high impact player.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a player in the last 2 years who has made more of an impact on this league than Tamerra. And that is such like a clear picture of the like exponential and accelerated pace at which this game is growing in the NWSL specifically, that there are players now whose names we can't even articulate, who 2 years from now are going to be the only names that you're going to be seeing on these awards lists. It feels like a move that is rooted in fear, to put it succinctly. A fear that if they open the doors and give the teams too much power, they're going to become uncomfortable. And I think the last thing a rich person wants to be is uncomfortable about their money.
Yeah, I mean, I think it reminds me a lot of when Michelle Kang bought the Washington Spirit in 2021 for $35 million.
Yes.
And a lot of people felt like she was inflating the value, and in order to get what she wanted, sort of creating a hypothetical above market price. But the idea that football, of all things in this capitalist world, abides by a market and criteria is just a complete falsehood. Never in my life has we ever seen, and these are all business people too, have they seen these sort of rules put on spending. If you want something in football or in most of life, you go out and you name your price. And I'm saying there's good things about that and there's bad things about that. But the idea that someone is policing player salaries is just nuts, when pretty much the entire sport, all sports in many ways, has shown us that, like, or all markets, all capitalist markets, that the market sets the price. If you think this player is worth that, you are entitled to pay them that. They don't have to show you they're on the top 150 marketable players for you to believe they could be a top 150 marketable player. And I think what it comes down to for me, when I think about why is the NWSL doing this, why are they kind of creating this criteria, is I think, like you said, fear is a really good word, because there are obviously people who fear being asked for more money. You know, if the cap goes up, which seems like the obvious solution here, just raise the cap, then every player is going to be knocking on that door saying there's more money for me. If you are afraid of that, you, in my opinion, you should either come out and say, me at this football club, we believe that we are not going to spend the most money. We're going to, develop young players. We're going to be an academy club. We're going to be a selling club. This is our identity, is we spend $2.5 million a year on our cap, and that's who we are. We're going to compete in the NWSL and we're going to pay less, and that's who we are. And I think owners should come out and say that. We're not Michelle Kang, or, we're not going to be paying top dollar. I think owners should come out and say that and own their decisions, because I think when we're left in this space where obviously there's an owners meeting and then Berman is sort of the mouthpiece for the owners, it creates, I think, a really strange world where we don't really know why, but this is kind of the outcome, is this sort of very strange list of rules. But in my head, it's like, and also to kind of play devil's advocate or sit back, like, I can understand in the history of this sport that there has been a lot of, like, the numbers are going up very quickly, and there has been leagues folding. So I can also understand, like, where an owner might want to be like, hey, can we slow down? But because we're not necessarily hearing from owners, or not necessarily hearing a dialogue, and I think this is why the NWSLPA is very right to be pissed off, because it was made without, opening the collective bargaining. I think we need to hear more of a dialogue from owners saying, hey, I'm worried about spending this much money. And once we hear that, I think we could understand the breaks that and the kind of the criteria that's being put on to kind of keep your Michelle Kangs happy and keep other owners happy who maybe say, oh, I'm not going to go out and get a high impact player. But I think we just need so much more dialogue from the league and the ownership to why, because all we hear, right, is like, it's boom time, it's women's sports is growing, and then it's like, well, just raise the cap. Like, if it's as good, if business is as good as if business is as good as you say it is, then what's holding us back?
Right.
So for me, it's like, I just want to hear someone say, hey, we're actually fear. I think you used a really good word there, fear, like Tamerra. I really think fear is an interesting concept for people who have their money on the line here. And I honestly think it would be interesting to keep some of those owners in the league, in theory, to see, because sport is not always the person who spends the most money wins, to see how a team spending less money competes in the NWSL. But there are going to be people who say, hey, if you don't want the salary cap to be $4.5 million, you shouldn't be an NWSL owner. And that's kind of the next stage, right? 26, 27, Arthur Blank's coming in 28, and there was NFL owner, huge ties with US soccer. Like, there is so much money coming in. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where we're going, because I think this is it's almost like we're seeing it as the NWSL versus the NWSLPA, but we can imagine, listener, I don't know this for sure, but we can sort of imagine there's like a mini civil war going on between the NWSL owners, right?
Yeah. And to your point about Atlanta, as this league continues to grow, the expectation that every team is operating with the same strategy, the same ethos, the same set of
Budget.
priorities
Yeah,
is
the
just
same
going to
expansion
get more
fees.
and more
Not true.
naive. Yeah, the same
Yeah.
budget, the same like way that they want to spend money. We're only going to see more diversity of thought, which I think is great. I think it's going to make, to your point about sort of civil wars, one of the things that I love most about this game is how anytime two teams meet on the pitch, it's always a war of philosophies, of cultures, of it's more than about like the shirts and the people, the bodies in them running around the field. It's always about, yes, two different schools of thought in conversation with each other on the pitch. And the sport itself is just sort of the expression of that like encounter. But we're going to start seeing more and more of that in the NWSL. And we've spoken so much on this very podcast about how the more that we start seeing these smart investments from NWSL clubs, the more we're starting to see the same teams finish at the top of the table and making it into the postseason and winning championships and competing in these international tournaments, of which we're going to continue getting more. And so I think that this is also for us sort of a good moment to sort of check our own expectations about, you know, being always aligned politically or ideologically with NWSL clubs. I think ultimately that diversity also needs to be like, we need to make space for that kind of diversity too. But yeah, I think the way that people respond to discomfort and fear says a lot. And to your point, I agree that it's like whether you're saying that you want to spend a bunch of money or whether you're saying that you don't want to spend a lot of money or not, we see it. We see who the players that you're signing. We see the facilities, you know, we see the kinds of conditions that you are that are creating environments for players at these different clubs. So we kind of already know. And like you said, there are benefits, I think, to just coming out and saying that, if only to the point of helping set expectations. But I do think that as the league continues to grow and as more teams enter this league, as expansion sides, the heavier that sort of question is going to be. And it's something that I would like to see, because clarity and transparency, to the extent possible, I think create equity. And yes, this is the first iteration of this rule. We have no idea where it's going to go. Arbitration is nearly guaranteed and something that I expect to happen imminently. Like I said, the timing of this rule with it being the end of the year, and you know what happens at the end of the year. Everybody's sick. I feel like I've talked to, in the last couple of days, a handful of people, work colleagues, sources, personal, like friends and family who are sick right now. That slows things down too. All of those are factors right now. People traveling out of the country. Not that stopped people from pushing decisions through before, because Zoom exists, as people like Michelle King who are everywhere all the time. But the point is, we are still at the very early stages of this. Free agency opens 2 days from the recording of this podcast. That's going to open up a whole other slew of plot points that could be related to this high impact player rule. So
Trinity Rodman could sign a new contract at any time, listener. We don't know. We do not know. And that could be the NWSL settling their grievance. That could be Trinity Rodman and the Washington Spirit coming up with a new contract under the high impact rules or not under the high impact rules. Anything is possible.
All right. That's our show. That was a lot to sift through.
Yes.
Theo, thank you so much for doing that with me. I would have been overwhelmed to do it alone.
You're welcome. And thank you for being here too. I can't think of anyone else I would rather get into numbers, rules, law, concept, what it is to be an NWSL owner.
All
these
stuff.
big feelings, T, you and me. What a way to close out the year.
Truly. I feel like there have been so many like quasi conclusions. Like the first time me and Meg thought it was going to be our last episode together. The second time we thought it was going to be our last episode together. The end of the NWSL season. And now we're at the end of the calendar year, our last episode of the calendar year. I mean, okay, before I get into all of my closing credits, Theo, if you could sum up this calendar year, not just NWSL specific, but like the calendar year of women's football in one word, what would it be?
One word's really hard.
Okay, you can do two.
Can I do two?
I don't like hard rules, yeah.
Unstoppably fun.
It was fun.
I was reminiscing about the Colombia-Brazil Copa America final the other day, and there was something unstoppably fun about that game, which was probably the most memorable game of 2025 for me. But even thinking about, obviously being in Switzerland for the Euros, it was fun. It was a really fun year of football. I think we were treated to a lot of great finals and a lot of crazy games.
Mm-hmm.
And we should enjoy that fun while it's here. You know, football goes through many stages. And I really think 2025 delivered in terms of drama, the drama and the fun. It was a really fun year. Maybe we've seen years with sort of better football or better Ballon d'Ors, but I think the fun, it was a really unstoppably fun year. That's where I'll go. What about you, T? 2 words to describe 2025?
Shedding skin.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more.
Like, I think generally women's soccer, at least since I have been covering it as a journalist, I imagine it as like a snake that is just constantly shedding its skin. And the moment that you think, well, I never think this, but the moment that, royal you think that, the ground is firm beneath your feet and things are set and we can start making predictions about how things are going to look even the next year, is the moment that the snake begins to shed its skin.
Tamerra, that's a really, really good metaphor. And can I blow your mind?
Please. That's my favorite kind of question to be asked.
In the Chinese calendar, 2025 was the year of the snake.
It was.
So you were feeling something with that exfoliation, deep exfoliation, and that skin.
There you go.
So great place to end. But I thought you were really. I didn't know where you were at on Chinese zodiac or East Asian horoscopes, but I was like,
no,
wow.
As soon as you mentioned it, I'm like, yes, it was in the snake.
You were feeling something. Right.
And we're headed into the year of the horse, I believe, right? Which
sounds right.
We can unpack that next week when we're firmly
fully feeling equine.
Yeah. Yes. I love it. Here's to more exfoliation, especially in these harsh winter months for those of you in the relevant hemispheres for that weather. But thanks for listening. I'm Tamerra Griffin. This has been Full Time. I'm going to be off exfoliating and face masking somewhere while I take my time. Make sure that you reach out to us, like I mentioned, everywhere you scroll at TA Fulltime. Instagram and TikTok is where you'll find the most fun. We're always posting interesting things there that you can't always even catch on this very podcast. And if you like watching your podcasts, know that we post this episode on YouTube as well. We always check our inboxes, so feel free to slide through DMs or write us an email, fulltime@theathletic.com. And if you didn't know, my last time saying it this year, and I still don't think I've memorized the link, but I'm going to try because I don't have the show notes in front of me right now, that The Athletic and Yahoo Sports have partnered to deliver the very best coverage of women's sports via a women's sports hub that you should be able to find at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports.
She did it. She did it. Happy 2025, everyone.
It's a 2025 miracle.
Shedding the skin of the scripts being in front of you.
Shedding the skin of relying on the show notes to read that URL. But if you have not memorized it, I'm giving you grace. It's in the show notes. Thank you, as always, for listening. This podcast is not possible without our esteemed producer, King of the Transition, Theo Lloyd Hughes. Thank you for joining me on this side of the mic today. Our video producer, Leah Griffin. Many, many beautiful, sunny trips to you, my friend, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. And of course, always with us in spirit, Meg Linehan, my co-host. Thank you so much, as always, for listening to this episode and every single one that we've recorded in 2025. What an incredible, wild, unpredictable, exhausting, exhilarating, joyful, sometimes tragic and sad, honestly, ride that it's been. And you've been with us every step of the way, in person, online, virtually, spiritually, all of the ways. And we appreciate you so much. Take care, be safe, stay hydrated, have a wonderful new year if this is when you celebrate New Year. And we'll see you in 2026.